British Columbia and Quebec. Why that is for a number of different reasons. Some of it is societal and cultural. Some of it is a result of expectations of parents. In many cases, especially in our Aboriginal communities, it's as a result of poverty and lack of opportunity and because of broken families in other areas. So I really don't want that there. Thank you very much. Okay. Can anybody in the back not hear me? In which case, is that better? If you can't hear, wave and I will try and speak more loudly. The fact, sorry.
It's still not clear to your panelists, so that's why they were asking.
Okay.
Increase the sound.
Can you hear? I can hear sort of from background. Okay. So it's really important to try and unpack this issue, and I'm sure we will be hearing from the rest of the panel members far more in great detail. But over the course of the globe, about 12 million girls are forced into marriage before their 18th birthday. As I said, it's an issue across the globe, but most prevalent in South Asia and in sub-Saharan Africa. And a big part of that is due to poverty, and it's due to marginalized. It is something that has immediate and very devastating impact on young women. Women that are married, girls that are married before the age of 18, tend to have less control over their bodies, less control over family planning, family spacing, the decision to have children. They are more likely to be out of school. They are more likely to be impacted by the adverse effects of pregnancy because their bodies are not yet ready to carry children. It limits their choices going on for the rest of their lives. If they don't have an education, if they are forced into marriage, if they are not able to complete their schooling, they're not able to have access to the type of jobs, professional opportunities, access to income that other women do. This is particularly devastating for marginalized communities, as I said earlier, particularly for here in Pakistan, that is religious communities. In Canada, it can be on occasion ethnic communities. And so it really deserves our attention. I'm always encouraged when I speak to a forum like this to do a little bit of public education on Canadian programming. We have in Canada, and I think many people know, we have a feminist foreign policy. We have a feminist international assistance policy, which means that we place the rights of women and girls at the center of our decision making in our policy-related decisions and our programming decisions. So what we're trying to do here in Pakistan, as we are around the world, is work with organizations that are able to engage with young women and in these communities to try and help address the underlying causes of these issues. But the bottom line remains that this is something that we all have to address. It is not simply a religious question. It is a question that transcends religions, and it really has at its heart poverty and inequality. And if we are able to get at that, then we try and create the opportunities, the educational opportunities, the professional opportunities, so that parents value educating their girls, so that girls themselves are in a position to make informed choices. This is something that the governments have to support at every level, and something certainly that the Canadian government will continue to support. So I'm going to stop there for now to try and respect my 5 minutes or so, and so we can hear from the rest of the panel, but I really look forward to the debate and having the opportunity for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Because we're hoping to have a discussion with you, we're asking speakers, thank you so much for keeping to the shortened time. I think here we have recognized, the Supreme Court of Pakistan has also recognized that being threatened and being excluded, having less space, it's not just a question of age of marriage and conversion. And the Supreme Court has given specific instructions in 2014 regarding the protection and the promotion of the rights of our religious minorities. I would also like to mention that CEDAW, the Committee on the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, on Pakistan's 5th periodic report in 2020, also has in almost every area of concern identified the need to do more regarding women from different minorities, and they're talking about religious and ethnic and other aspects as well. But I think The attempt here to move forward, there's been a lot of concern among local civil society who've raised their voices regarding the forced conversions and marriages taking place in Pakistan. And there's been attempts, unfortunately, which have not succeeded so far, in bringing about legislation to deal with this. And on this topic, then, I would like to ask Peter Jacob to come and tell us a little about where the bill is today, what happened, what he thinks is the reasons this did not go through as we move towards Pakistan specifically. Thank you, Peter. Peter is an activist, long-time activist, human rights activist, and for minorities, a long-time colleague in the struggle for human rights for all.
Thank you so much, Farida, for this generous introduction. Members of the panel and everyone, good morning. I would like to begin by my appreciation for the organizers of this conference who have turned the living memory of struggle of Asma Jahangir into an event that will go a long way in collecting, bringing the activists and defenders of human rights together to impress upon the issues that we still face as challenges, as the title of the conference goes. My second observation, because we were talking about the bill, Farida has indicated, she has pointed out to a definition of forced conversion, which can be elaborated again, but she has very wisely given me a topic on the bill which was somehow turned down, rejected, dismissed, was the language used by a parliamentary committee on the forced conversions. Now this marks the turning down basically of recognition, the short-lived recognition that came about the problem. The rest of the time there was a long denial that there were any issues with regard to freedom of religion and particularly forced conversions. With this rejection of the bill of a committee which was formed by the two houses and across the parties, across the faith communities, across gender, actually was a sabotage of the agenda of people's protections. It goes without saying that I don't recall in past 20 years when the Parliament of Pakistan discussed the serious question of religious freedom. On the other hand, it has time and again passed resolutions and legislation which goes to restrict the religious freedom, whether it is in the form of cybercrime laws, blasphemy laws, and many other resolutions which go to constitute, not only constitute, but perpetuate a preferential treatment of majority, but conversely, everybody, discrimination against everybody. Now, with this bill, what happened was that the criminal element who organized in an organized manner perpetrate forced conversions of young girls from Sindh and Punjab mainly, but not limited to these provinces. That is the data which Center for Social Justice showed by analyzing 162 cases up to 2020. But this rejection of the bill also emboldened the criminal element, and that is why in the ongoing year we have a spike. We see a spike in reported cases of forced conversions. So far there have been 38 cases reported this year. Now, whatever we hear from the parliamentary committee, which was a great sabotage, I must say, and we can recognize, we know the elements who forcibly and arrogantly, I must say, rejected the bill. We also that it killed the hope for better Pakistan for some time, until activists like yourselves revive that strength and spirit to fight against the injustice. I would also like to point out that while we have made our parliament redundant and the committees, human rights committees, and it is not without notice that the functional committee of the Senate on human rights was turned into a standing committee, which meant curtailing the powers of that committee. I would also like to mention here that we need to see what competence and jurisdiction those committees and some of the institutions that were involved. Now, my due respects to Dr. Qibla Ayaz and his institution, the Council of Islamic Ideology. I must say that legally speaking, constitutionally speaking, the Council of Islamic Ideology had any jurisdiction with regard to forced conversions of minor girls is a question. And that is why it is not only a question of jurisdiction. I must also stress that Ministry of Religious Affairs, which has been part of the problem rather than solution, has failed to show any impartiality on this. That is why they have not shown their impartiality on this, and that is why the inquiry into the matter was half-baked, was half-hearted. It never brought the facts to the light which would guide us, which would guide the nation as to how to solve this problem. The professional competence of the committee itself is manifest in the report, which lacks basically the data. So when the committee members said that they did not find any evidence of forced conversions, my question is, where did they look for the evidence? They did not look at the evidence. There are court verdicts, there are prosecution records, there are records of the Rahmans, and there are victims basically, some of whom were speaking before this conference. We showed their witnesses of the victims and their families. So I would say that we need to come out of this denial, first of all. And secondly, address the matter objectively. Where in the world have the human rights abuses been ignored this long? It has been a story of 70 plus years. The forced conversions were earliest complained by the first law minister, Jogendranath Mandal, and on and on. That is why I would say, you see this short-lived recognition by the government of the problem needs to be investigated in objective manner and then brought to the House to make it into a legislation that would put a permanent stop to not only forced conversions but all violations against freedom of religion or belief. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. I'm sorry, I am trying to keep to the time, so you'll excuse me so we have the next session. With that, I think the most appropriate person is Dr. Qibla Ayaz to come in, and partly I think it's useful to know what is the role of the Council of Islamic Ideology in such matters, and does it have jurisdiction? But also, more importantly, what is the religious perspective on conversions, and what is an appropriate age of marriage? I know that Islam does not allow, under any circumstances, forced marriages. You need to have consent. So if you would like to come and elaborate, we'd be happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Excellency from Canada, my very good friend Peter Jacob, distinguished panelists, the delegates of the conference, a great morning indeed that we are gathered here under the name of an organization attributed to the most courageous woman of Pakistan, Asma Jahangir. A candle in the wind, indeed. I have been asked to highlight the role, the relevance of the Council of Islamic Ideology in the bills like the bill on forced conversion. Article 2 of the Constitution very clearly says that Islam is the state religion of Pakistan. Chapter 9 of the Constitution, 2 to 7, 2 to 8, and onward, say that no law repugnant to Quran and Sunnah will be constituted, will be made part of the legal dictum, legal rules of Pakistan. And the role has been assigned to the Council of Islamic Ideology. The forced conversion bill has certain clauses on which Council of Islamic Ideology has shown assent, has appreciated, and that is that forced conversion in any form is not allowed in any religion, including Islam. And punishment proposed by those who are committing forced conversion are in any way they are party to the process of forced conversion are liable to penalty. Council of Islamic Ideology has very openly agreed to it. But then there are problems in the process of conversion by choice. Conversion which is not forced, in which there are certain clauses to which a joint committee of the Ministry of Religious Affairs and the research wing of the Council of Islamic Ideology showed and expressed reservations, like waiting for 90 days, appearing before a session judge, and a series of clauses which, of course, from Islamic point of view, can give rise to a number of problems. Because the acceptance of another religion, converting to another religion by choice, the clauses in the proposed bill are problematic in the opinion of the research wing of the Council of Islamic Ideology. Because there are certain attached practices, religious practices with conversion, and if one is obliged to wait for 90 days, then in the case of death, for example, the issue of inheritance can crop up, which religion would be adopted in such a situation. The cases, for example, of the religious practices, the method of offering funeral, all these sort of things are questions which need to be addressed. We have agreed that as far as the bill is concerned, this is need of the time, but our suggestion is that instead of giving this bill a title of forced conversion, we can say regulation of religious conversion. Because if we say forced conversion, it would mean that we are agreeing to the problem that Pakistan has the problem of forced conversion, while our opinion is that may be a case or two, but in general, this problem does not exist in Pakistan. There are reports from Sindh, some parts of Sindh. There are reports from some sort of Punjab, but no report from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, no report from Balochistan, no report from Islamabad, no report from Gilgit-Baltistan. So this is a specific problem of a certain area which needs to be addressed, as Anwarul Haq Kakad committee has suggested, through some sort of administrative measures. Our suggestion is that we are open, Ministry of Religious Affairs, Council of Islamic Ideology, and we can together with the support and guidance of the Center for Social Justice and the Ministry of Human Rights, we can sit together, and we hope that we will be able to together develop a bill which will be implementable, which will not be controversial, and which would in a better way solve the problem which exists in some parts of Pakistan. These were some of my words which I wanted to share with you. I thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Qibla. I'm very happy to hear that the Council of Islamic Ideology is happy to sit down with the Center for Social Justice, and I hope some of the rest of us who may not be in Peter's organizations, the lawyers, the experts, you do realize, of course, that between Sindh and Punjab, that's more than 75% of the population of Pakistan. So I think we can agree that this is a problem. I think one should not hide from the facts. If we hide from the facts, we will never be able to address them. So I would say that we have people who've done research, and yes, there's two sides, and we will be hearing about the social, economic, the other aspects of it. But coming to the legal positions and how to go forward, I'd like to ask Dr. Elena, are you online? I don't see her online. Can we have her back online? Please, there you are. Who is the founder of the Coalition for Genocide Response, and she's also a senior researcher for the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Pakistani Minorities. So perhaps we can have your input on what is the way forward in terms of the contentions in taking this forward legally. Thank you.
Thank you very much for organizing this important conference, and big kudos to the co-panelists for their contributions. Child and forced marriage are an issue that is...
You're going to have to speak closer to your mic or increase the volume. We're having difficulty hearing you.
Sure. Thank you very much for organizing this important conference, and big kudos to the co-panelists for their contributions. Child and forced marriage are an issue that is still omnipresent. This despite the international standards on the issue and indeed the international recognition of forced marriage as a type of modern-day slavery. Only a few days ago, the House of Commons here in the UK debated marriage and civil partnership minimum age bill. Still today, the law in England and Wales means that people can get married at 18 or with parental consent at 16 or 17. But there is no law against religious and cultural ceremonies, which are not registered with local councils and can take place under the age of even 16 and 17. The new bill would make all marriages and civil partnership under 18 illegal. This is not a particularly massive issue in England and Wales, but according to research, for example, in the last 12 months alone, there have been 76 cases of child marriage, and that also, in one of the cases, that the child was 7. So this is the situation in the UK. However, I wanted to focus on one particular issue here today, and that's an issue that I've been working together with the all-party parliamentary group on Pakistani minorities, and that's the issue of abductions, forcible conversions, forcible marriages of religious minority women and girls in Pakistan. In recent years, and specifically in recent months, media outlets covered a number of stories involving young girls who have been abducted, forcibly converted, forcibly married and abused. And while those stories are tragic, the cases are not isolated occurrences. While the abductions, forced conversions, forced marriages and abuse are perpetrated by individuals, the fate of religious minority women and girls is often sealed, as the existing laws or handling such cases deem any legal recourse unavailable or ineffective. For example, in one of the cases, the family of a 14-year-old girl, age Y, have worked tirelessly trying to get her back. In her case, the court dismissed a petition to have the marriage and forced conversion overturned, reportedly stating that a girl is ready to marry after she has had her first period. In another case, another 14-year-old girl, MS, faced a similar fate. Her family has been taken to the courts, has taken the case to the court. Initially, the Sessions Court directed that the girl be rehabilitated in a women's shelter. However, later the Lahore High Court overturned this decision and ordered that the 14-year-old girl be returned to her abductor. She has since escaped from her abductor. Most recently, there is another case of a 15-year-old girl who was also abducted, forcibly converted and married to a man twice her age. Her family has been trying to get her back with assistance from the police, however, they have been unsuccessful. In other cases where the families managed to get their daughters back, there may be other challenges preventing the girls from returning to their lives, as in the case of PM, the then 14-year-old girl who was abducted, forcibly converted, forcibly married to her abductor as well. Her family took to the courts in an attempt to reunite her with the family. In this case, the Lahore High Court affirmed that an underage girl lacks capacity to convert and ordered that she be returned to her family home. However, since then, she had to flee her home because of threats she received, as she was considered to be an apostate. These few cases have received international attention, whether through media or NGOs assisting the families and the girls. However, in Pakistan alone, research suggests that more than 1,000 women and girls from Hindu and Christian communities are abducted, forcibly converted to Islam and forcibly married to their captors every year. Each of the girls share the same fate of abduction, forcible conversion, forcible marriage and abuse. They also share similar characteristics, all young, underage, belonging to religious minorities. And these stories continue to be invisible. And the issue definitely requires further attention. And as reported in December 2020, Prime Minister Imran Khan ordered an investigation into religious minority girls' forced conversions. However, according to the reports, this inquiry launched in 2019 appears to look at 2 cases in isolation. And one would expect more commitment and action considering the ever-growing number of reports on the issue. Currently, any efforts to address the issue are predominantly reactive. Little proactive effort is expended to prevent such treatment of religious minority women and girls in the first place. The first step to address the issue must be the recognition of the issue for what it is. This should help to identify the tactics and red flags of such conduct. Second, states must ensure that police forces are trained and equipped to investigate and respond to such cases. This includes not only securing the timely return, but also ensuring that the perpetrator is investigated, prosecuted for the abduction, forced conversion, forced marriage and abuse. Third, laws that enable or accommodate such treatment of women and girls, empowering the perpetrator, need to be repealed or amended as soon as possible, and new laws introduced to provide better protection to the targeted religious minority women and girls. To explore the issue further, Lord Alton of Liverpool, a crossbench peer at the UK House of Lords, together with the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Pakistani Minorities, launched an inquiry into the issue that aimed to identify the needed responses. The inquiry took place in the first part of 2021 and considered several oral submissions, had also an open call for written submissions and desktop research, and collected evidence from tens and tens of witnesses. This report is going to be published next week, and I'll be happy to share a copy with you all. The report includes several recommendations on how to address the issue that should be taken into consideration and hopefully follow up on. So hopefully I'll be sharing the report very soon. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be very happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think what's very important, please go ahead. I think what is important is bringing us back to the reality of what happens on the ground, and I think the issue of abductions is also important. And the thing is that once somebody is abducted in our society here, even if she does want to go back to her family will not accept her. There are all kinds of social and economic dynamics at play, and to talk more about them, I'm going to invite Dr. Ida, who is a researcher, who has done a lot of work on this, to talk about the realities on the ground and the socio-cultural economic aspects of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for organizing this conference and giving visibility to this very important subject. So I would like to draw your attention to the issue of multiple marginality. These minority communities are subjected to generally in Pakistan, and these marginalities are stemming from social division, chahe wo class, caste, gender, religion ho, so they are somehow the other positioned at subordinated place. So that, and we live in a society which is determined by socio-religious hostilities. There is no, we cannot stay blind to our lived realities, to our challenges minorities face every now and then. And then you need to situate the problem of early, forced conversions or religious conversion in that society. By situating this problem, I would like to draw your attention to the gender dimension. What I have done my research and did a few in-depth interviews, and I came to know that, there is a kind of tension between women choices and patriarchal community claims. So it's a very difficult, it's a very thin line to substantiate, as Dr. Qibla Ayaz has said, but then there are other, difficulties, that it's a kind of one-way conversion, like minority women, especially they are coming from poor, downtrodden communities, and economic issue, financial disparities they face every now and then. They are not going to school, they are underage, they cannot make informed decision, they have nothing else to look forward. Or फिर अगर शादी हो जाए तो शादी is the be all and end all road to happiness, and then they get to that kind of attraction. But then again there is very, as I said, we live in a society where we come across socio-cultural problems, hostility, religious discrimination, and we face this kind of even girls who get who marry Muslim men, and then their life journeys are not easy. They have to navigate through uneven terrain, like as Dr. Qibla Ayaz, you have discussed the issue of rituals at the time of funerals or other things. So I have seen in my own research the girls who have even converted to Islam, but again there's a strong shadow of lower caste that lurk throughout their lived experiences. कि उनको चूड़ी कहना, these kind of cliches, derogatory cliches are still used against them. And then there is a question कि जब मर जाओगी तो who is going to जनाजा पड़ेगा, because that kind of religious identities are strongly inscribed in themselves. So there's a very little space. We live in a society, very little space is given to interfaith alliances. So that's these are the problem. And then there are intra-community community patriarchal restriction faced by minority women within their community, because there's a strong resentment among minority community कि हमारी लड़कियां उधर जा रही हैं. So they want to, control, but at the same time they are venting out their resentment by, controlling and curtailing the choices of women. But then there are strong, questions that revolve around early marriages. I also would like to relate it to the issue of personal laws of religious minorities, which are still not, implementable. Sometimes rules or procedures are not made. So there is no kind of, protection, legal protections which need to be, if there are, there are certain areas where we come across hearing complaints that it is a forced marriage, but in the court of law, girls go and then they make a claim that they are doing it by free choice. So there is this friction keeps on, moving. So we have to be very objective in analyzing these stories, because devil is in the detail. But at the same time, because very little space is given to interfaith marriages, so that a kind of, hostilities, these girls are being pressurized throughout their lived careers, because girls have to negotiate, they have to change their name, they have to change their dresses, they have to change their social behaviors. So these are the kinds of things which I would like to draw your attention to it. And as I said, that we need to see this problem from multiple dimensions, because we have to situate this problem in a country or in an environment which is already, when there are socio-cultural, religious divisions, strong religious polarization, so they further compound these phenomena. So, shukriya.
Thank you so much. I think Ira's points about the dimensions within you live and you negotiate and mediate your life, navigate it, the various power dynamics, because it is also power, it is not just socio-cultural, all of that has a very strong power dynamic. But exclusions and inclusions of majority, minority are not limited to Pakistan, and I'd like to now call on Dr. Nasreen Rahman to talk about the kinds of issues that we're facing in terms of forced conversions and marriages in the context of the United Kingdom. Dr. Nasreen?
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. I here address Asma's spirit, which presides over this gathering, her colleagues and friends, the foot soldiers of the human rights community in Pakistan, honorable judges, excellencies, friends and comrades. It is indeed an honor for me and a privilege to speak here. But before I go any further, I would like to thank the team at AGHS and the others who have organized this conference. Bravo, all of you. Asma would have been very proud of what is happening here for the past 2 days. So I am going to speak mainly about forced marriage in the UK, but I think it has some ramifications for what is happening in Pakistan. So the intersection of forced marriage and religion. Now, marriage, of course, is one of the most important relationships that human beings enter into in a lifetime. So in the UK, what is a valid marriage? There must be proof of capacity, which is that you must be able to understand mentally what it means to be married. कि आप ये समझते हैं कि शादी का मतलब क्या है? Have you attained the legal age of marriage, the age of consent, which is 18 in the UK, but I will turn to certain lacunas in the law later. And it's not very clear what it is in Pakistan, because the legal community, the cultural communities, and the religious communities are giving different messages, which indeed is also the case in the UK. Now, both parties to the marriage, and this is very important where forced conversions are concerned, both parties to the marriage must give their full and free and informed consent. And there must be proof of full, free, and informed consent. And the marriage must be entered into in the presence and authorized by a recognized officer of the law and the Registrar General in England. And those people who actually authorize marriages are supposed to be trained. And this is again an area of contention in England. So who are the people who are forced into marriage in England? 7 years ago, when the Forced Marriage Commission was set up, the focus was on Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, a lot on Muslims, Pakistanis, and minorities and migrants. What we found in 7 years, it happens everywhere. It happens in all communities. It cuts across social class. It cuts across religions. It cuts across gender. It happens everywhere. And with due respect, forced marriage is a hidden crime. So because we don't know, do we not know, or statistics have not recognized, or researchers have not looked into that area, does that mean that forced marriage does not happen? How do we actually find out that full, fair, and free consent has been given? And as Farida mentioned earlier, that in fact, consent is ongoing. If you're in a marriage and you wish to leave it, but you can't because of social, familial, or religious pressure, that marriage then transforms into a forced marriage. You might have given consent to the marriage, but conditions are such that you wish to leave it. और आप उस शादी को छोड़ना चाहते हैं और आप नहीं छोड़ सकते क्योंकि आपके ऊपर समाजी, खानदान का या किसी मजहबी वजह से आप नहीं छोड़ सकते, तो वो शादी जो है वो फॉर्स्ड मैरिज हो जाती है. So, who are the people who are forced into marriage? Again, over 90%, 90% से ज़्यादा, it's women who are forced into marriage, but men are also forced into marriage. Now, one very interesting thing that comes before the Commission and the voluntary sector organizations about forced marriage amongst Muslims in the UK, कि कुरान जो है वो आपको इजाज़त देता है कि एक मुसलमान मर्द जो है वो एक क्रिश्चियन, ईसाई औरत और एक ज्यूइश, एक यहूदी औरत से शादी कर सकता है. So, मगर खानदान जो है, लोग जो है, वो अक्सर जब यहूदी और क्रिश्चियन औरतें उनके खानदान में आती हैं, they forced conversions there. Now, the age of consent in the UK is actually 18, but parents and guardians can give permission for the marriage of a child that's over 16 and under 18. So that's a very vulnerable area, and I would here like to say that the age of consent and the clarity on the age of consent is very important, because a 16-year-old can't really understand what marriage is, and schools must teach children about marriage and consent. Then I'm delighted to share with you that just as I'm speaking to you in England, Parliament has accepted, both houses of Parliament accepted yesterday that there's a bill to criminalize marriage of those under 18. I just want to highlight another community that is under threat of forced marriage and, interestingly, forced conversion, and that is the LGBTQ community. And what happens over there is that religious elders actually are approached by families to guide young people into marriage, into heterosexual marriage. And over there, what happens is that then those people are told that your religion forbids this, and then they are coerced into marriage. So I think that Farida is sending me lots of white slips. I thought I was supposed to speak for 6 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes, so I think I've exceeded my time. Thank you very, very much, and all the foot soldiers against forced marriage and forced conversions. One forced conversion and one forced marriage is one forced conversion and one forced marriage too many.
I'm sorry, as I keep repeating to my panelists who are doing a brilliant job speaking, I'm getting parchis from behind, so you will have to bear with me. And we have our last speaker, and the last is never the least. I am delighted that we have Devi with, who is Advocate General of the Sindh High Court. It's wonderful that she is, first of all, a woman, so Talia. And secondly, that she is from the very excluded community of the Hindus, so even badi bahut zyada taliyan. She's been a former member of the National Commission on the Status of Women. So Kalpana, the way forward, please. Thank you.
Thank you. You know my intro. I'm from the land of Sufis, and I am the land of Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. No doubt I am the land of founder of Constitution of Pakistan, Shaheed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. So I pay tribute to Didi Asma Jahangir in 2 lines of Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai. Sari raat subhan jagi jan yaad kayo. सारी रात सुभान जागी जिन याद कयो उन जे अब्दुल लतीफ़ चे तिंजी मिट्टी लधो मान कोड़े कन सलाम अच्छी अंगण उनन जे. मैं आपको इसकी मीनिंग भी बता दूं कि सारी रात जो अपने महबूब को याद करता है, महबूब नॉट मेल और फीमेल, जिससे आपका दिल जुड़ा होता है, तो शाह अब्दुल लतीफ़ भिटाई कह रहे हैं कि उनकी मट्टी जो है उसको मान मिलता है, उसको इज्जत मिलती है, और हजारे उनको सलाम करने आते हैं उनकी ज़मीन पे. हम आज दीदी के लिए यहाँ पर जमा हुए हैं और मुझे बहुत खुशी होती है. आई फील लोनली व्हेन आवर बिल वाज रिजेक्टेड बाय द पार्लियामेंट्री कमेटी. उस दिन मुझे फील हुआ कि वी आर ऑर्फन, कि विदाउट हियरिंग, without arguments, Parliamentary Committee rejected the forced conversion bill. So, my speaker already explained properly. I think we are working since last many years. Peter, me, and my Hamkhal, we are working on it. My question with Qibla Ayaz Saab. After meeting with you, you know, we met in Natya Gali. मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा कि we have mind like you, कि आप हमारी लिबर्टी को भी बात करते हैं, हमारी एंग्जाइटी को भी एक्सप्लेन करते हैं. My question is कि why conversion only for teenager girls? It is not alarming. Only girls and only for the purpose of marriages? After partition, Qibla Saab, because I am from Sindh, so मैं सिंध की बात करूँगी कि after partition, I came to know my parents कि we were 50% community in, I think, in Pakistan. Now, after conversion, after discriminatory laws, my community left the Pakistan, their motherland. और अभी हम in Pakistan, I think in Sindh, we are only 2 or 3%. और ये मैं जिम्मेदारी से बात कर रही हूँ. और जब हम जाते हैं, हम अपनी ज़मीन, हम अपनी मदरलैंड, सिंध हमारी रग में बसी हुई है, हमारी रोम रोम में है, पाकिस्तान मेरा मुल्क है. लेकिन जब बार बार हमसे ये लिया जाता है, ये अग्नि परीक्षा कि हम मुहब्बे वतन हैं, वी आर मुहब्बे वतन सर. तो ये जो बार बार इन शेप ऑफ कभी फोर्स कन्वर्जन, कभी ये डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी लॉज, तो ये तोड़ रहे हैं. पाकिस्तान इज बुके ऑफ डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ फ्लावर्स, पर अभी वो फ्लावर्स जो हैं वो निकलते जा रहे हैं. I am from Sindh, so definitely I would, with permission of chair, मैं explain करूँगी कि Sindh government, this credit goes to Sindh, कि Sindh government in different ways, in different times, they are trying to support the minority community. You know कि we have सिंध गवर्नमेंट ने चाइल्ड प्रोटेक्शन मैरिज बिल दिया, देन सिंध गवर्नमेंट ने फोर्स कन्वर्जन बिल दिया. अनफॉर्चुनेटली सेम फोर्स कन्वर्जन बिल वाज रिजेक्टेड एंड नॉट साइंड बाय देन गवर्नर. अगर मुझे ये चिट भी आ गई है, मैं ज़्यादा कुछ बोलना चाह रही थी कि मुझे लॉज पे डिस्कशन करनी है, सो समंदर को कूजे में मैं बंद कर रही हूँ कि वो जो बिल हमारा रिजेक्ट हुआ एंड देन गवर्नर नॉट साइन दैट बिल. लेकिन मेरी हम्बल रिक्वेस्ट है इस आसमान दीदी के इस प्लेटफॉर्म से, जो हमारे लिए लड़ती रहीं, जो शी वॉज वॉइस ऑफ वॉइसलेस पर्सन, उनकी कमी हमें हमेशा महसूस होती रहेगी. आप सिर्फ ये जो मैरिज बिल हमारा सिंध में आया था, रिस्ट्रिक्शन ऑफ चाइल्ड मैरिज बिल, आप उस पर एक्ट करवा दें, आपका 50% मसला हल हो जाएगा. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. इससे पहले कि दूसरी पर्ची आ जाए, आई एम सॉरी. थैंक यू वेरी मच.
बहुत माफ़ी, एक सेकंड, लोग दूसरे सेशन के स्पीकर्स यहाँ पर बैठे हैं, तो इसलिए हमें बहुत माजरत हुआ है. Can I just take 1 minute to wrap up for 30 seconds, which is that it's clear that this kind of exclusion, forced conversions, early age child marriages, etc. take place everywhere. But coming back, and that they are always linked to socio-economic factors of poverty and exclusion, which are greater than just the simple, this is a symptomatic of exclusions and the lack of human rights for some communities. We will, to go forward in Pakistan, it's clear to me, as Dr. Naseem said, you need the full, free and informed consent for marriage, also for conversion. And how are we to establish that? So I think there are 3 things that I would suggest. You need to start the discussion. जिस तरह से पहले कहा है, अगर वो मानते ही नहीं है कि मसला है, तो वो मसला कभी हम एड्रेस ही नहीं कर सकते हैं. You need a study. Why don't you have a proper study on what conversions are taking place, what marriages are taking place, and what the issues are on the ground? Why are we so afraid to find out what the situation on the ground is and the dynamics? And then I find, and nobody's mentioned this, so let me mention it, I don't hear any state narrative against forced conversions or against forced marriages. Why is there nothing from the state that says, ye galat baat hai, ye hum nahi taslim karte hain? Thank you so much to the brilliant panel of speakers we have. I'm sorry about pressing you for time, but the next panelists are also waiting. Thank you everyone, bahut shukriya. couldn't hear what she was saying. Thank you for coming. I couldn't talk.
रिफ्रेश
नेक्स्ट मॉडरेटर
नहीं
पेपर्स तो पड़े हुए हैं
नहीं कुछ नहीं है हाँ पेपर है पेन दे दो
मैं पेन ड्रॉप
Thank you, Ms. Farida Shaheed, and all the respected participants for participating in our conference. Now I will invite Mr. Rashid Rahman and all our respected speakers to the stage. Speakers for the Accountability and Victimization panel, please come on stage.
Okay. Is it on? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, thank you. Welcome to the Asma Jahangir Conference 2021. Sorry, we are running a little late, so we have to speed up things. But let me say one thing in the very beginning, and that is that we owe an apology to all of you for the fact that the government's inexplicable policy of not giving visas to some of our invited speakers means that we have less than we had hoped for or anticipated. So apologies for that. Second, we have a request that we would like, I must add, the visas that were denied were largely to women and human rights activists, which makes it even less explicable. Second, we would request our audience to help us make some of these conversations on human rights popular on social media. And it would be a great help if you tweet with our hashtag AJCONF21 so that we can become a trend today in Pakistan. Thank you very much. Now, I have a very eminent panel of speakers, some of whom are present and some are on their way. On the stage, as you can see, we have Senator Syed Ali Zafar, who needs no introduction, I think. He's a member of PTI and a very eminent lawyer. And we have Mr. Salahuddin Ahmed,
who is the President of the Sindh High Court Bar Association. Welcome, Mr. Ahmed. We are expecting Mr. Qamar Zaman Kaira in the next 10 minutes, fingers crossed. And last but certainly not least, I would like to invite former Prime Minister Shahid Khaqan Abbasi as the keynote speaker. Welcome, Mr. Abbasi. Our topic of discussion today is accountability or victimization, question mark. I don't have to dilate too much on the fact that accountability has become a very, very controversial issue in Pakistan, not just in the current times, but almost from the day the process was initiated. And today our speakers will enlighten us on the pros and cons of this process and how it is playing out. Sorry, I forgot Mr. Haider Rasool Mirza, who is a NAB expert and an advocate of the Supreme Court. Apologies, sir. So without further ado, I would like to invite, as a compensation, Mr. Haider Rasool Mirza to come and deliver his speech.
Thank you very much, Ji. I thank the Asma Jahangir Foundation, Supreme Court Bar, Pakistan Bar Council, S.M. Boon Saab, Tar Saab, and all the distinguished guests, panelists. A very good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum. The topic that I would be speaking on is accountability, and when we talk about accountability, it would be appropriate for us to trace the history of this accountability process. And if we go into the recent past, we see that we had the Ihtisab Act 97. We saw that the then political opposition complained of being victimized by that Ihtisab Act. Then we saw the Musharraf era, where we were introduced with the National Accountability Ordinance, and now we have the National Accountability Bureau as a result of that ordinance. And again we saw that the then political opposition was victimized, and later on, post 18th Amendment, we saw a vacuum. We saw a silence on part of the Accountability Bureau, and that vacuum seems to have been filled by the suo motu jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. We saw 2 chairmen, NAB, being sent home. And then in the recent past, we again see the political opposition complaining of the accountability process being used as a tool for victimization. One thing which comes out in my understanding as something which is common, that corruption is an issue, and everyone agrees with it that this is an issue. The only problem seems to be the way this issue is addressed. The problem seems to be in using the National Accountability Bureau as a tool by every incumbent government, every government using it for accountability of others, not their own. And that is where the issue lies, in my opinion. In my opinion, when we talk about the process of accountability, it has to be objective. It has to be something which should be seen to be fair. It should be something which should be seen to be across the board. But that, unfortunately, is not what we see in reality. Unfortunately, we see the Accountability Bureau also realizing its importance as a tool for victimization. They perhaps have appreciated the fact that every government needs us. Perhaps every government cannot operate against its political opposition without us. There are numerous examples which I believe nobody needs to repeat. Recently, we also saw the Honorable Supreme Court giving observations to this effect, This is not my view as a lawyer, this is the observation of the Supreme Court of Pakistan, observing recently while granting bail to Khaja Saad Rafiq Saab and Khaja Salman Rafiq Saab. And the Supreme Court observed that the National Accountability Bureau is exercising unfettered powers, misusing its authority, ignoring the constitutional freedoms of the people and their liberty, and being used as a tool for victimization, and they also use the word political engineering. But interestingly, the reference in which this order was being passed was not quashed. Bail was granted, but the observations of such a scathing nature were termed as tentative. And now comes the other aspect, inaction on part of the legislature. What did the legislature do to hold the Accountability Bureau accountable in light of such observations? And I believe it's the inaction on part of the legislature in the recent past that has led to that vacuum and that has led to that lack of debate on regulating the accountability process. The debate is now unfortunately shifting towards victimization because regulation of the accountability process has not been put to the real debate. Every institution needs to be independent, but independence should not be unfettered. Independence has to be regulated. Regulation should come from the legislature. Till date, approximately 22 years have passed. We don't have any rules and regulations regarding the Accountability Bureau. The chairman has vast powers to arrest, to detain. We know the FIA cannot arrest in inquiry. We know the anti-corruption department will not arrest during an inquiry, but we don't know whether NAB will arrest during a complaint verification, or will arrest during an inquiry, or will it arrest during an investigation. Whimsical, arbitrary exercise of power is the issue. That needs to be regulated if you want to get rid of this victimization process. You don't need to get rid of the accountability process. You don't need to get rid of the accountability laws. You need to regulate the laws. You need to hold them accountable for their excesses. You need to legislate in a manner which allows the institutional regulation should be focused on not curbing the independence of an institution, but regulating the institution under the rule of law. And that is what the only place where this can be done in an objective manner is the legislature. It is the job of the legislature, and unfortunately, the recent history has been when some amendments have been introduced, they have been person-specific, alleged to be. And recently, I think the second and the third amendment ordinances of 21 need to be and deserve to be mentioned. Blatant person-specific ordinances, legislation, bypassing the legislature. The incumbent government wants the chairman to continue, the prosecutor general to continue, but they don't want to legislate and regulate their powers. They don't want to regulate their powers to arrest, detain, form a reference. Keeping this in mind, I believe the vacuum should not be filled by the Honorable Supreme Court or the High Courts. They should be interpreting what the legislature intends, what the legislature intends to do, and that should be interpreted through the judgments, and that is how, in the long run, there may be a possibility for regulating the accountability process without any complaints of victimization. Every accused person claims to be a victim. Every accused person will complain. But when you focus on the rule of law, rather than political engineering, rather than forcing people to change their loyalties, rather than using the accountability process as a threat, I believe the legislature's inaction can also be, in my humble view, attributed to this threat. That the legislators are also subjected to this one-sided, lopsided accountability. The moment they advance towards any legislative bill introducing any regulatory process, I believe they are also threatened by the same bureau that, you know what, there is a file, there is a reference, there is a complaint. I believe that rules and regulations regulating the Accountability Bureau are an hour of the need of the hour. I believe that the legislature has to come to this, because all of them have been a victim in one era or the other. I believe there has to be some consensus on how to legislate on this important issue. And I again emphasize that the debate should not move towards getting rid of accountability. The debate should move towards regulating accountability laws and regulating those institutions which are all empowered to hold everyone accountable. For example, it is in the interest of public when you talk about cheating public at large. It is in the interest of public when they feel that comfort that yes, if I am cheated by someone or if we all are cheated by somebody, then we have some recourse to justice. But when you talk about misuse of authority, when you talk about the offense of asset beyond means, you see they are used in a very biased and partisan way. Any bureaucrat, any officer who has to do his job feels threatened. His ability to serve the state is under threat when he thinks about the magnitude of a project or the governmental body which he is heading. He feels threatened that, you know what, if I sign this file, I will be subjected to this victimization in the future. I won't do it, somebody else needs to do it. So the impact of this lopsided, arbitrary, whimsical exercise of power, the real victim seems to be the state. The real victim seems to be the state, and that is the reason why I urge. We have two eminent legislators already in the panel, and I would urge them to reach a consensus on regulating this accountability process rather than getting rid of this accountability process. And I think that is what should be the way forward. I thank you all once again, and it was an honor to be a part of this function and the conference. Thank you very much.
The wonders of technology. My mic isn't working, so I've had to come up here. Sorry. I want to welcome Mr. Kamar Zaman Kaira, Der Aaye Durust Aaye. He needs no introduction. He's a PPP leader and a very prominent leader at that. And we can't seem to get rid of him on TV these days. But anyway, I won't hold that against him. In any case, let us proceed quickly to our next speaker because time is a constraint. And I would like to invite Mr. Haider Rasool Mirza, NAB expert and advocate, Supreme Court.
He just spoke.
Sorry?
He just spoke.
नहीं, सलाउद्दीन अहमद किया ना?
नहीं, Haider Rasool spoke.
अभी the person. Sorry, I've got it mixed up. Mr. Mirza has just spoken. I want to invite Mr. Salahuddin Ahmed to come and deliver his thoughts on the subject. Thank you.
Learned panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be invited here today to speak at the Asma Jahangir conference for 2001. I'd like to congratulate, first of all, the Asma Jahangir Foundation and AGHS and all the other, I see the President of the Supreme Court Bar, Mr. Hassan Boone here. I'd like to congratulate all of them for holding this conference. And just from yesterday's proceedings, it seems that the conference is running very close to Asma Jahangir's spirit. It's already stirred a hornet's nest, and I can just imagine her sitting up in heaven puffing on a bidi and laughing in that cackling manner that she had. So I'd like to congratulate the organizers. Coming towards the topic, as far as NAB is concerned, and whether it is following a regime of accountability or of victimization, I think it's important to look at the history. And NAB is a continuation of laws that started back in Ayub Khan's era, from Ebdo and Proda, etc. And they went on. There was the Ehtasab Ordinance, and this is the current new avatar. The very purpose of NAB, and I think when we talk about reforming accountability, we have to understand the history of the NAB ordinance itself. And the very purpose of NAB from the very beginning was political engineering. That is the reason why General Pervez Musharraf brought it in. The initial chairman of NAB was General Amjad, I think, who was the first chairman, who was rather naive in his views. And when he tried to pursue even-handed accountability and he went after some political bigwigs that General Musharraf wanted to cultivate, he was unceremoniously let go of, and then NAB continued along the path for which it was designed. Now, why do I say that the very basis and foundation of NAB is political engineering? Because quite clearly it was unconstitutional to begin with. Now, there's Article 12 of the Constitution, which says that nothing will be an offense. No person will be tried for a criminal offense if it was not a criminal offense at the time that he committed that act. That's basic. अगर उस वक्त वो जुर्म ही नहीं था, तो उसके खिलाफ मुझे कोई सजा नहीं मिल सकती. दूसरा, the other part of Article 12 of the Constitution says that nobody shall be prescribed a greater punishment than what was prescribed at the time that he committed the offense. Now, the NAB ordinance does both, right? The NAB ordinance creates new offenses, like for example, willful bank default, etc., was made a NAB offense, although it was never an offense previously. And it also enhanced punishments for offenses such as corruption, etc. They existed, there were laws that punished them, but the NAB ordinance enhanced those penalties. And it did so with retrospective effect. So it was in clear violation of the Constitution, and therefore people were, and to this date, Mir Shakil Rahman, for example, spent nearly a year in jail for an offense that was alleged to have been committed about 15 years before the NAB ordinance was promulgated. He was being tried under NAB laws for an offense that was alleged to have been committed when the NAB ordinance didn't exist. The other unconstitutional aspect of the NAB ordinance was that it allowed the NAB chairman an arbitrary discretion to decide what cases would be prosecuted under the NAB regime and what cases would be left to the ordinary criminal laws. So you had a lot of these cases where some people, for identical offenses, for minor offense, seemingly minor offenses also, they had NAB proceedings against them, they were denied their ordinary statutory rights of bail, they were subjected to harsher punishments, and others were for no cogent reason left to the ordinary law. This kind of discretion, allowing an individual to choose what set of laws becomes operational against whom. The Supreme Court of Pakistan has struck down laws like these, from 1957, there was a Waris Miah case. Quite recently, 2016, 2017, they did it with FIA offenses, banking offenses in the Salman Mujahid case. But the NAB ordinance somehow escaped that judicial scrutiny. It was challenged in Asfandyar Wali's case, and the reasoning in Asfandyar Wali's case is absolutely astonishing. There are all these constitutional challenges are ignored, and the court holds, and I want to quote this because I don't want to get a Supreme Court's finding wrong. It says, the de facto, it says, while upholding the constitutional validity of the NAB ordinance, the court observes that the de facto and de jure status of the present regime, this is the Musharraf regime, was recognized to create a corruption-free atmosphere. And this court took judicial notice of the fact that the people of Pakistan generally welcomed the army takeover. And this was kept in mind while examining the validity of the impugned ordinance. So basically the NAB ordinance, the constitutionality of the NAB ordinance was upheld because the Supreme Court in Asfandiar Wali's case said that the people of Pakistan wanted an army takeover, and that's why we are holding the NAB ordinance despite its constitutional defects. We are upholding its constitutionality. Now, I do think the time has come, not just for the legislature, but also for the judiciary to re-examine the vires of the NAB ordinance. Now, there is another aspect of Asfandiar Wali's case which bears mention. Now, you know, the other corruption, offenses of corruption, etc., that are under the Pakistan Penal Code, they are equally applicable to the military. In fact, all the various armed forces laws, they specifically incorporate the offenses of the Pakistan Penal Code. However, the NAB ordinance, conveniently, and this is why I say political engineering, it excludes the military from the purview of the NAB. Now in the Asfandiar, however, it did not, in its original phrasing, exclude judges from the purview of NAB. But when in Asfandiar Wali's case, the Supreme Court was deciding the constitutionality of the NAB ordinance, the Supreme Court said, well, judges should also, we are all right, and it was challenged on the basis of discrimination. Why are the armed forces being excluded? So the Honorable Supreme Court said, well, it's all right for the armed forces to be excluded, that's all right, it's not discrimination, but also we feel that judges should also be excluded because we have our own accountability mechanism, and therefore it is not discriminatory. So it is, I think, high time that needs to be re-examined because we're facing a lot of problems. Like the NAB regime has, they cite figures about how much recovery they have done and all of that. But there is equally, I'm sorry, I didn't see this note earlier, I'm sorry. I'll just wrap up. But equally, there is a paralysis amongst the administration because of this perpetual hanging sword of the NAB. You see, selective accountability is sometimes worse than no accountability because it breeds this impression that it is not my misdeeds for which I am being punished, but it is for my closeness to a political party or due to my political views that I am being punished. So there is no lesson learnt for the people involved. They say, okay, next time I'll improve my political ideology and my political stances. It's not my corruption for which I am facing charges. Now, I'd like to end with this wonderful quote, because I've criticized one judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court. I should actually laud another judgment, and that is the one in Saad Rafiq's case. Justice Maqbool Bakar in that starts with a quote from John Stuart Mill, whilst examining the historical role of NAB in this political engineering exercise. He quotes Mill, and Mill says, "A state which dwarfs its men in order that they may be more docile instruments in its hands, even for beneficial purposes, will soon find that with small men, no great thing can ever be accomplished." Thank you.
Allow me to apologize for all my fumbling today. It seems the smog in Lahore has descended as a fog on my brain. And since my friend Qamar Zaman Kaira has just traversed that smog-filled road traffic of Lahore, he needs to catch his breath. So in the meantime, I would like to invite Senator Syed Ali Zafar to give us his thoughts. Thank you, sir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'd like to first of all thank the organizers, including my dear friends, the Supreme Court Bar Association President and their committee, the Pakistan Bar Council, the panelists, ladies and gentlemen. 1,000 or more than 1,000 years ago, when the Greek people were talking about democracy, do you know what was the most feared form of government for them? Anybody from the audience? Most feared form of government? Kleptocracy. Kleptocracy literally means when power goes into the hands of thieves. Kleptocratic form of government, by definition, is when the powerful get together, they control the reins of a state, and then they loot and plunder its wealth so that the poor remain poor and the powerful continue to become richer. This was the most feared form of government. In my reading of Pakistan's history, people may agree or disagree with it, but in my view, in my interpretation, kleptocracy has actually invaded into the corridors of power in Pakistan. And not only that, but they have legitimized kleptocracy in the eyes of the public. And that is where the problem lies. If corruption of any kind becomes legitimate, if people start believing that they can get away with corruption, if people start accepting it as a facet of life, then the nation can only go downwards. It cannot rise. And that is where the problem lies. The biggest threat, in my view, the biggest threat, and this is not just my view, but when Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of this country, when he gave his first address, he also said this, that the biggest threat to our country is corruption. And I'm sure that no one here, not the panelists, not anybody in the public, will say that corruption is good. Everybody agrees that that is the greatest threat. It's a curse to democracy. It's a cancer. We have to fight this monster. That's also a fact. And we have to fight this monster. It is not easy. The fight is not easy, ladies and gentlemen, because those who have got their tentacles in power, those who have the kleptocrats or kleptocracy, they will fight back. And do you know how they will fight back? They will fight back by creating a perception that the process of accountability is flawed. It's mala fide. It is to target someone. They will want to ensure that in the eyes of the public, because without the public there can be no accountability. Without you believing in the process of accountability, there can be no accountability. So kleptocracy will try they will try to create a perception that people will start believing as reality. A perception that the accountability process is not impartial, that it is based on victimization. So any leadership that is to fight this war of the nation will have to walk a very tight rope. On the one hand, they will have to ensure that there is no corrupt person, powerful or not, that goes scot-free. They'll have to bring the guilt of corruption home. But at the same time, the tightrope calls for a balance. Ladies and gentlemen, it calls for a balance. And the balance lies in not overreaching. The balance lies in ensuring that no innocent are victimized. The balance lies in ensuring that it is not used as a tool for political vendetta. That is the balance of leadership. The leadership has to ensure that the guilty are not free, but the overreaching of any institution also has to be stopped and eradicated. Remember, in this fight, and I'll repeat again, because sometimes repetition is important. Remember that in this fight, perceptions are very important. The kleptocracy will try and create a certain reality in our minds, inaccurate reality that this accountability process is only one-sided. They will have arguments, they will have proofs. They may even have small evidences, ladies and gentlemen. But it is for us to clear and find out what is real and what is not. It is for us to continue with the process of accountability, hold tight to the rope of accountability. Not let it go, ladies and gentlemen. Not let it go. Hold tight so that we can actually bring the criminals, the real criminals, to justice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in order to understand and clear the cobweb, clear the fog, in order to ensure that whether this is a reality, are people actually being victimized, or is the process of accountability real and genuine? In order to clear that, I will need to just take you back in time in the history of our politics and the history of NAB. And the reason I want to do that is because something was a reality before, and that reality is being used by kleptocracy to create a perception today. The reality of the past is being used to create the perception of today. So I need to take you there. And I call this part of Pakistan's history, ladies and gentlemen, the revolving door politics. Have you ever gone into a hotel with a revolving door? As one person is going in, another is going out. And this revolving door politics of Pakistan is bad history. It is a history when there were two main political parties at each other's throats. One was the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, and the other was the Pakistan People's Party. They were at each other's throats. So in 88, Benazir Bhutto, Madam Benazir Bhutto, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, became the Prime Minister. Ghulam Ishaq Khan was used by the PMLN to throw her out in exercise of powers under what they call the Article 58(2)(b). After 2 years, she was out. There was a lot of tension between the two. Revolving door, she goes out, in comes Mr. Nawaz Sharif as the Prime Minister. Again, enmity, enmity, enmity. and the same president, after 3 years, in 1993, throws out Nawaz Sharif government also. Through the revolving door, Nawaz Sharif goes out, and through the revolving door, immediately comes in Madam Bezaniz again. She comes in, and in 2 years, less than 3 years, she's thrown out again. This time by her own president exercising the same power. In comes Nawaz Sharif Saab again. And what does he do? This time he says, and it's a historical fact, so I'm not going to mince words. This time he says, I will use ihtisab as a tool to crush my opponents. He said, I will make a law, because corruption everybody hates, and that will look good in the public, and it will go good. And while it is looking good, I will also be able to jail my opponents. So he appointed this gentleman called Saifur Rahman as the chairman of the Ihtisab Bureau. In common parlance, it was the time of Ihtisab justice. Cases were filed against Benazir, her family, her mother, her husband, and we all know what was going on. But this did not live long. Less than 3 years later, Mr. Nawaz Sharif was also sent home, and General Pervez Musharraf Saab came in. He said, ihtisab out, NAB in. And the NAB law was promulgated. This NAB law was also used by that regime as a tool for political opponent victimization. That was the reality. That was the historic reality. Then what happened? Then what happened was that our great leaders of the two parties that were fighting sat together somewhere. Where did they sit? They sat in the House of Parliament in London, and they came up with an agreement. Just 5 minutes. They came up with an agreement, and they said, no more victimization. We have been victimizing each other. They admitted in the document itself that we have been victimizing each other. No more victimization. And we will make it more transparent by having a chairman appointed by the leader of the opposition and the leader of the house together. So they said we will have an independent chairman, and therefore everything will be all right. When they came back in power after Musharraf was gone, they did make an amendment in the NAB law. That first amendment was relating to the appointment of the chairman. But what they did not do, ladies and gentlemen, what they did not do is equally important. There were many lacunas in the law, many gaps, bid'atein, due to which that law could have been abused. They opted not to change those laws in NAB, in spite of being in power for ages. I remember, ladies and gentlemen, same place, Awari, not here but next building. We were having a conference under the auspices of Supreme Court Bar Association of Pakistan. I think Mr. Kaira was also there. And we called upon the political parties of the time, and we said, please amend the laws so that we can make them more transparent. Please make sure that we don't lose this accountability process to perceptions. But what did the PMLN say? There is no need. The law is clear. It is unambiguous. we will not change it. So the law was not changed. Ladies and gentlemen, when we came, I've got a thing, I had some 10 minutes to go, but I'll try and close this now in 5 minutes. So ladies and gentlemen, when we came in 2018, we inherited this law. The current government inherited this law. And we inherited the lacunas. But one thing was clear, that in these 3 years period, we said we are not going to spare anyone, we are going to change the perception at least. The perception that the powerful are not going to be held accountable. We said we will leave NAB to reach out and touch kleptocracy if they can. And we let that happen. So the perception, the positive reality today is that amongst the general public, everybody now is fearful of NAB. It is fearful that corruption will not be allowed to be, nobody will be allowed to get away with corruption. That powerful can also be prosecuted. But at the same time, having made this point, the perception is still there. Even while I was coming into the hall and talking to a few people, the perception was still there that no, this accountability process is not as transparent. We heard two of our very learned panelists also say the same thing. So, what is the job of the government now? The job is first to identify why this perception is still persisting. It is an inaccurate perception. It is not correct, because what we want to do is make sure that everybody who's corrupt, wherever he may be, is brought to the book. But why is the perception still lingering? Why is the repetition by the kleptocracy that no, this accountability process is not transparent? Why is it still continuing? We need to identify that, and I have identified the 3 points. One, first problem is that NAB has overreached itself. And how has it overreached? It is because of the lacunas in the law. What are they doing? They are taking collective decisions by cabinets. They have filed references on the basis of that. They are harassing bureaucrats who decide a question, who decide something without any corruption, without any evidence of wrongdoing, without any benefit, and prosecuting them. They are getting involved with private disputes. So the impression is being created as if a number of innocent people are being victimized. And that impression is feeding into the perception that the accountability process is not correct. Sorry. Second important aspect is that yes, NAB has certain structural flaws. I would say, as a lawyer, what is most important is for an institution or investigating agency to have a separate department of investigation and a separate department of prosecution, so that when the investigators bring in the case to the prosecution should be able to independently judge. That is not what is happening. The investigator comes in, brings in a case, and the case is filed. So at the end of the day, when cases are not being decided, perception again comes that no, look, because the cases are not being decided, it is taking a long time, therefore the entire process is one-sided. So these perceptions, ladies and gentlemen, have to be cleared. The latest ordinance that we have passed, I agree, it should not have been through ordinances maybe, but the fact is that because we cannot sit together as political parties and decide matters in cases of emergency, for the temporary period, we need to bring the law, we need to correct the law. So these lacunas, because of which NAB was overreaching, these lacunas have been clarified in this ordinance. NAB can no longer, without proof of corruption, file a reference against anyone. These are the lacunas so that the perception is right, so that the perception is finished and the accurate facts are there. We need the public, we need the people like you to stand by us in the matters of accountability. With this, I would just like to quote one famous German philosopher, and he was talking about how to tackle monsters. He said, while tackling monsters, don't become a monster yourself. If you stare into an abyss for a long, long time, the abyss will stare back at you. My hope today, seeing all of you and hoping that our perceptions are changing, my hope and wish is, and I quote in other words, I say that if we keep on staring into hope, hope will stare back at us. So I would hope that we ultimately continue with this process of accountability. It is not victimization, it is only a perception. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry. Apologies to Senator Ali Zafar, we do have time constraints. The good news is that because we started late, we have a small respite from the organizers. We can go on till 1:30, but nevertheless we want to leave at least 15 minutes for a question and answer session from the audience. So we nevertheless have this time constraint. I would now request Mr. Qamar Zaman Kaira, PPP leader, to come and address us on this very important issue. Qamar Saab.
Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, I have requested the moderator that please allow me to speak in Urdu so that I can conclude my opinion in few words. Because of the less of time, I am aware of my incapacity to be good in English. Thank you. बहुत शुक्रिया. ख़वातीन व हज़रात, मैं आसमा जहांगीर फाउंडेशन के तमाम ऑर्गेनाइजर्स का, तमाम आज के साथियों का, सुप्रीम कोर्ट बार एसोसिएशन का, तमाम पार्टिसिपेंट्स का शुक्रिया अदा करता हूं. आसमा जहांगीर ने अपनी ज़िंदगी में वो पौधा लगाया और आज आप उसको सींच रहे हैं, उसको आगे लेके चल रहे हैं, जो किसी महज़ब मुआशरे में एक सही मानों में सिविल सोसाइटी, एक महज़ब मुआशरा क्रिएट करने के लिए बहुत ज़रूरी फैक्टर है. पब्लिक ओपिनियन मेरी नज़र में दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा कानून, सबसे ताकतवर चीज़ है. कोई कानून, कोई आइन पब्लिक ओपिनियन से ताकतवर नहीं हो सकता. दुनिया की डेमोक्रेसीज में यही हुआ है, जहाँ तक हमने पढ़ा थोड़ा बहुत. आज का मौजू तो वकला का था कि अकाउंटेबिलिटी लॉज क्या होने चाहिए और उनकी कितनी अहमियत है. और इसमें कोई शक नहीं है कि मॉडर्न स्टेट असूलों और कवानीन पे चलती है. बेहतर कवानीन दीगर अक़वाम से सीख के और अपने आप से सीख के आप अच्छे कवानीन बनाते हैं और मुआशरे को उन कवानीन के तहत चलाते हैं, तभी मुआशरे महज़ब मुआशरे बन पाते हैं. इसमें तो कोई दूसरी राय नहीं है. लेकिन ख़वातीन व हज़रात, क्या हमारे मुल्क में कवानीन की कोई कमी है? कोई कानून ऐसा है जो हमारे मुल्क में है नहीं? और अगर नहीं है तो उसको बनाने में कितना वक्त लग सकता है? अगर हुक्मरान वक्त चाहे और पार्लियामेंट के अंदर बैठी हुई कुव्वतें चाहें कि कानून जल्द बनाने हैं, तो जो डेफिशिएंसी है कानून के अंदर या कवानीन के अंदर, वो तो फौरी तौर पे या बहुत क्विकेस्ट पॉसिबल टाइम में वो हल हो सकती है. सो कोई इदारा ऐसा नहीं है जो हमारे यहाँ नहीं है. मसला हमारा यह है कि हमारे इदारे काम नहीं कर रहे. आज की इस कॉन्फ्रेंस में भी हम मुतालबे कर रहे हैं. हम कह रहे हैं कि ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए, ऐसा नहीं करना चाहिए. किससे मुतालबा कर रहे हैं? किससे कह रहे हैं कि वो रूल ऑफ लॉ लाए? किससे मुतालबा कर रहे हैं कि वो कानून पे अमल दरामद करे? किससे मुतालबा कर रहे हैं कि वो इंसाफ करे? किससे मुतालबा कर रहे हैं कि वो गुड गवर्नेंस लाए? किससे मुतालबा कर रहे हैं कि वो अकाउंटेबिलिटी कवानीन को ठीक करे? खुद इंटरेस्ट ग्रुप से? क्या हमारे मुतालबे दुरुस्त हैं या हम सब सिविल सोसाइटी से? मैं आपसे मुतालबे कर रहा हूं. तो मेरा ख्याल यह है कि इस वक्त आज जो हमारी स्टेट है, ये स्टेट उस रंग में नहीं है जिस तरह हम आम तौर पर इस्तेमाल करते हैं. हमारी जो रियासत है, रियासत भी वैसे आजकल हम और मानों में इस्तेमाल करते हैं, लेकिन उसके कई माने निकाल दिए ना आज़म नज़ीर साहब आपने. सो रियासत उस रंग में नहीं, लेकिन रियासत का बुनियादी ढांचा जो है वो کیا صرف لوگوں کے قانون بنا دینے سے, چند مطالبات کر دینے سے دنیا میں کبھی ایسا ہوا خواتین و حضرات کے کسی معاشرے میں قانون بننے سے معاشرے ٹھیک ہو گئے؟ ایسا کبھی نہیں ہوا, میری دانست میں ایسا کبھی نہیں ہوا. یہ کنٹینیو اسٹرگل ہے, اور جب تک آپ ایک صحیح معنوں میں معاشرہ, ایک لبرل معاشرہ تشکیل دیتے ہیں, پھر آپ کی لبرل سوسائٹی جنم لیتی ہے. وہ ایک دوسرے کو ریلیٹ کرتے ہیں. آپ لبرل ڈیموکریسی کی بات کر رہے ہیں, آپ اکاؤنٹیبلٹی کی بات کر رہے ہیں. ہمارے ہاں بہت سارے ادارے بنائے جاتے ہیں. پولیس خراب ہوئی تو ہم نے ایلیٹ فورس بنا دی, ایلیٹ فورس خراب ہوئی تو ہم نے ڈولفن فورس بنا دی, پھر ہم نے موٹر وے کے اوپر نئی پولیس بنا دی. بہت سارے, اسی طرح عدالتوں کے اندر کام ڈیلے ہوا تو ہم نے ریپڈ عدالتیں بنا دی تاکہ جلدی کام ہو سکے. کچھ عرصہ تک تو وہ کام کرتے ہیں, پھر وہ ہمارے جیسے ہو جاتے ہیں, کیونکہ الٹیمیٹلی اس معاشرے نے ان کو سک ان کر لینا ہوتا ہے, ان کو اپنے جیسا بنا لینا ہوتا ہے. تو بنیادی لڑائی کیا ہے, بنیادی مسئلہ کیا ہے؟ آپ جن ججز سے یہ مطالبہ کر رہے ہیں, کیا ان کا اپنا بلیو اس پہ ہے, اور ان کو کیا آپ کا اور میرا خوف ہے کہ اگر وہ انصاف نہیں کریں گے تو ہم ان کے خلاف سڑکوں پہ کھڑے ہو جائیں گے؟ کیا ان سیاستدانوں سے جن سے ہم مطالبے کر رہے ہیں, کیا ان کو میرا اور آپ کا یہ خوف ہے کہ اگر انہوں نے صحیح معنوں میں سیاست نہ کی تو آپ اور میں ان کے خلاف کھڑے ہو جائیں گے؟ کیا ہماری ایڈمنسٹریشن کو یہ ہے, کیا ہماری فوج کو یہ ہے؟ دنیا کے کسی معاشرے میں ایسا نہیں ہوا کہ خالی سرمن سے, خالی لیکچر سے چیزیں ٹھیک ہو گئی. ایک سٹرگل ہے, اور میرا خیال یہ ہے دنیا میں معاشرے ڈیموکریٹائز ہوئے ہیں. ڈیموکریسی نے ڈیموکریٹائز نہیں کیا معاشروں کو. جمہوریتیں معاشروں میں آئی ہیں, جمہوری اداروں نے جمہوریت پیدا نہیں کی ہے. ایک سٹرگل ہے, ہم اس سٹرگل میں کوئی چیز مس کر رہے ہیں. اور پاکستان جب بنا تھا نا جی, تو ہندوستان کی تقسیم کے جو مخالفین تھے ان میں سے کچھ صاحب عقل لوگ تھے, بڑے کمال کے لوگ بھی تھے, ہمارا ان سے بڑا شدید اختلاف ہوا. انہوں نے بہت سارے ایشوز کہے تھے, اور اس پہ بھی کہا تھا یہ جو مس گورننس ہے اور کرپشن ہے, اور اس پہ انہوں نے یہ کہا تھا کہ پاکستان گریجولی مارشل لاؤ کی آماجگاہ بنے گا. کمزور گورننس اس معاشرے کو خراب کرے گی, یہاں کی بزنس ایلیٹس اس کو لوٹے گی. گریجولی اس ملک کے طاقتور لوگ کرپشن میں انوالو ہوں گے, اور یہ کرپشن زیادہ سوسائٹی بن جائے گی. آج 74 سال بعد اگر آپ کھڑے ہو کے دیکھیں, ان کی بہت ساری باتیں اور بھی ہیں جو سچ ثابت ہو گئیں. اگر آج اکاؤنٹیبلٹی کے حوالے دیکھیں تو ان کی یہ بات بھی بالکل سچ ہے. اور کیا یہ ممکن ہو پائے گا؟ بالکل. آسما جہانگیر فاؤنڈیشن ہو یا اس طرح کی اور بہت ساری آرگنائزیشنز, یہ پبلک اویئرنیس کی بات کر رہی ہیں, پبلک اوپینین بلڈ کر رہے ہیں, اور پبلک اوپینین کے ساتھ ہی پبلک پریشر بلڈ ہوگا. میرا ذاتی خیال یہ ہے کہ میں تو ذاتی طور پہ یہ سمجھتا ہوں کہ لوگ اللہ سے بھی نہیں ڈرتے. سب سے بڑا خوف یہ ہمارے مذہبی لوگ یا ہم جیسے لوگ, ہم کہتے ہیں نا اللہ سے ڈرو, بڑا معاشرہ. آج کل ہماری حکومت بھی جو ہے وہ مدینہ کی ریاست کی باتیں کر رہی ہے, اور آج کل نئے نئے خیالات شروع ہو رہے ہیں. تو خواتین و حضرات, اللہ سے لوگ نہیں ڈرتے. اگر اللہ سے ڈرے تو پھر اکیلے 2-4 بندے بیٹھ کے کسی کمرے میں کوئی گناہ نہ کریں, کوئی غلطی نہ کریں, کیونکہ وہ ہر جگہ ہے. تصور ہمارا یہ ہے. لوگ پبلک اوپینین سے ڈرتے ہیں, وہی گناہ وہی غلطی جا کے پبلک میں کرنے سے اعتراض کرتے ہیں. یہ ممکن نہیں ہے. اسی طرح آپ کا جو کلچرل لاز ہوتے ہیں وہ بڑے پاورفل ہوتے ہیں. ایک بندہ جو بڑا بدماش ہے, بڑا خوفناک قسم کا کرمنل ہے, وہ پبلک اوپینین کو خاطر میں نہیں لاتا. لیکن آپ کا کلچر ہے کہ اگر آپ اسے کہیں کہ تم لنگوٹی باندھ کے اس بازار میں سے گزر جاؤ, تو یہ کلچرل نارم کے اگینسٹ ہے, وہ نہیں جائے گا. وہ بندہ مارتے ہوئے دیر نہیں کرے گا, وہ جرم کرتے ہوئے دیر نہیں کرے گا, وہ گناہ کرتے ہوئے دیر نہیں کرے گا, لیکن کلچر کے خلاف اس کو بہت سارے کام کرتے ہوئے کو روکنا پڑے گا. ہمیں دیکھنا ہوگا کہ کیا یہ لنک مس کیے بغیر ہم صرف اکاؤنٹیبلٹی ٹھیک کر لیں گے, احتساب ٹھیک ہو پائے گا؟ اگر آپ کی فوج نہیں مانے گی, اگر آپ کی عدلیہ نہیں مانے گی, اگر آپ کی سیاسی جماعتیں اس کے لیے گیئر اپ نہیں ہوں گی, اور وہ کیوں ہوں گے؟ جو اقتدار میں بیٹھے ہیں وہ صرف گورنمنٹ نہیں, جو پولیٹیکل لیڈرشپ ہوتی ہے, یا آپ کی لیڈرشپ ہے, یا فوج کی لیڈرشپ ہے, یہ سارے پبلک اوپینین کے لوگ ہیں. یہ سارے کے سارے خود انٹرسٹ گروپس ہیں. انہیں کیا ضرورت ہے اس سماج کو تبدیل کرنے کی؟ یہ ایٹ اٹس اون, یعنی ایک بندہ جو حکمران بنا ہے لیگل مین سے نہیں, ایک بندہ جو کسی عہدے پہ بیٹھا ہے کسی جائز طریقے سے نہیں. آپ بہت سارے وکلاء بیٹھے ہیں, ہو سکتا ہے آپ مطمئن ہوں, میں تو آپ کے ججز کے ایلیویشن پہ مطمئن نہیں ہوں. میں تو نہیں سمجھتا کہ آپ کسی صحیح طریقے سے ججز بناتے ہیں, اور پھر آپ ان سے توقع کرتے ہیں کہ وہ انصاف کریں گے. اسی طرح ہماری سوسائٹی میں جب میں الیکشن میں جاتا ہوں تو کوئی بندہ مجھے یہ نہیں پوچھتا کہ تو اس قابل ہے کہ نہیں, تیرا کل ماضی کیا تھا. میرے اوپر کوئی سماجی دباؤ نہیں ہے, اسی لیے میں ڈٹائی کے ساتھ غلطی کرتا ہوں, غلط کام کرتا ہوں, اور پھر آپ وکلا مجھے ڈیفینڈ کرتے ہیں, میں عدالتیں مینج کرتا ہوں اور نکل جاتا ہوں اس سے. اور خود بہت سارے طاقتور لوگ اپنی مرضی کے فیصلے کراتے ہیں. فوج والوں کو تو پوچھنا ہی ممکن نہیں ہے کیونکہ وہ طاقتور ہے, بندوق والا ہمیشہ طاقتور ہوتا ہے. لیکن دنیا میں پبلک اوپینین ہی ایوالو ہوا ہے. آج دنیا کی, مجھے آخری گزارش یہ ہے کہ آج دنیا کی جو مہذب ریاستیں ہیں وہاں پہ جب تک آپ اپنی اوورآل گورننس کو درست نہیں کرتے, آپ سماج کے اندر جن لوگوں کو اپنے ڈیوٹیز اسائن کی ہوئی ہیں آپ ان کے اوپر چیک نہیں رکھتے, اور وہ چیک خالی زبانی نہیں ہے, وہ چیک خالی عدالتی نہیں ہے, کیونکہ آپ نے بہت اچھے قانون بنا لیا, آپ نے مجھے پکڑ لیا, میں جائز مجرم ہوں, پکڑا گیا. میرا انویسٹیگیشن کرنے والا اور میرا انصاف کرنے والا کون ہے؟ وہ اگر میرے جیسا ہوگا یا میرے جیسا مینج ہونے والا ہوگا تو وہ ہو جائے گا. خواتین و حضرات, یہ وہ واحد کام ہے جو ہم مس کر رہے ہیں, اور اس کی طرف یہ صرف سیاسی جماعتوں کا, لیڈرشپ سیاسی جماعتوں نے کرنی ہے, سیاسی جماعتوں کا کام ہے, سول سوسائٹی آرگنائزیشنز کا کام ہے, اس میں ہمارے علماء کا کام ہے, اس میں ہمارے اساتذہ کا کام ہے. آپ ذرا غور کیجئے, آج ہماری سوسائٹی مورلی, ایتھیکلی آج سے 40 سال, 35 سال, 50 سال پہلے جیسی ہے. مٹیریلی وی ہیو گرون اے لاٹ, ہم نے کم گرو نہیں کیا, لیکن مورلی ہم کیوں گرے ہیں؟ اس لیے کہ مورالٹی صرف اپنے طور پہ انسان خود بڑے مورل والا کم ہوتا ہے, اس کو سوسائٹی کا پریشر باندھ کے رکھتا ہے. اور آج کی مہذب معاشروں میں اور ہم میں جو فرق ہے, جو مسنگ ہے, وہ وہی ہے. میں یہ سمجھتا ہوں کہ جب تک اکاؤنٹیبلٹی کے لیے ہمیں ایک بات یہ بھی سمجھنی ہوگی کہ اگر ہمیں آئین کے تحت ملک چلانا ہے تو پھر سارے اداروں کو آئین کے تحت کام کرنے کی یہ قسم اٹھا کے نہیں, خالی قسمیں تو جھوٹی بھی اٹھاتے ہیں اور اکثر اٹھاتے ہیں اور سارے ہی اٹھاتے ہیں. سو گزارش یہ ہے کہ ہمیں آئین کے اوپر عمل کرنا ہے, ڈیموکریسی کے تحت ملک چلانا ہے تو کلیئرٹی کے ساتھ چلائیے. جب تک آپ کلیئرٹی کے ساتھ دنیا میں, یہ میرا تصور نہیں ہے, میں صرف انسیڈنٹ کوٹ کرنے لگا ہوں, مجھے کوٹ نہ کر دیجئے کہ تم نے یہ کہا تھا. یہ دنیا میں بہت سارے وہ بھی لوگ آئے جو ڈکٹیٹرز تھے, جو فاشسٹ تھے, لیکن انہوں نے سنسیئرٹی کے ساتھ, کلیئرٹی کے ساتھ کام کیا اور وہ کچھ نہ کچھ سماجوں کو دے گئے. اگر ہم بیکوٹی میں رہیں گے, اسی الجھاؤں میں رہیں گے کہ چلنا تو ہم نے جمہوریت کے ساتھ ہے, رویہ ہمارا کوئی جمہوری نہیں, حکمران ہمارا جمہوری نہیں, عدالت ہماری جمہوری نہیں, تو کیسے جمہوریت آ پائے گی؟ خواتین و حضرات, مجھے راشد صاحب کا حکم آ گیا. اگر ہمارے ذہنوں میں سعودی اور چائنیز اکاؤنٹیبلٹی ماڈل رہے تو پھر میرے خواتین و حضرات المیہ یہ ہے کہ ہم نہ سعودی معاشرہ ہیں, نہ ایسا بن سکتے ہیں, نہ وہ قانون ہے جو چائنا کے اندر ہے, نہ چائنیز سماج ہے. تو ہمیں پہلے یہ کلیئر کرنا ہوگا کہ ہمیں کیا کرنا ہے. اگر اس پہ عمل کر کے ہمارا حکمران آگے بڑھے, اور یہ یاد رکھیے حکمران کوئی بھی ہو وہ آسانی سے اپنے پریویلیجز نہیں چھوڑا کرتا, اس کو ہم نے مجبور کرنا ہے. یہ آسما جہانگیر فاؤنڈیشن بڑا اعلیٰ فورم ہے, اور اگر ہم سماج کے اندر یہ پریشر بلڈ کر دیا, ووٹ ڈالتے ہوئے ہم نے لوگوں سے پوچھنا شروع کر دیا, سیاسی لیڈرشپ کو یہ پتا ہوا کہ میرا کردار دیکھ کے, میری ایبلٹی دیکھ کے مجھے ووٹ پڑنے ہیں, اگر جج کو پتا ہوا کہ میں نے غلط فیصلہ دیا تو لوگ میرے سامنے کھڑے ہو جائیں گے آ کے, جس طرح امریکہ میں آج کل بھی ایک ججمنٹ کے خلاف لوگ باہر نکلے ہوئے ہیں ایک پروسیجر کے, تبھی جا کے دنیا میں صحیح معنوں میں جمہوریتیں پیدا ہو سکتی ہیں. ایک جو ہمارا خواب ہے لبرل ڈیموکریسی کا, وہاں تک پہنچنے کے لیے جو سفر ہونا ہے وہ تو ہم کر رہے ہیں, لیکن بعض اوقات وہ سفر معکوس رنگ میں ہوتا ہے. ہم ایک قدم آگے 2 قدم پیچھے چلتے چلتے میری دانست میں مٹیریلی گرو کر کے مورلی گری ہوئی سوسائٹی ہے. ہمیں سب کو یہ, اور خاص طور پہ آپ جیسے صاحب شعور لوگوں کو اور ہمارے اساتذہ اور تھنکرز کو ہمیں وہ رہنمائی دینی ہوگی. متی اللہ جیسے چند صحافی اگر کچھ اپنی لاؤبالی پن میں کہہ لوں, مجھے اجازت دے دے, تو وہ لاؤبالی تو نہیں ہے, بڑی ذمہ داری ہے, لیکن میں نے ایسے ذرا ایزی موڈ, ایسے لوگ یا چند ایسے اور صحافی ہمارے اگر سچ لکھنے کی پاداش میں سزائیں پائیں گے اور ہم صرف کنڈیم کریں گے تو اس سے معاشرہ ٹھیک نہیں ہو جائے گا. یہ بہت لمبا سفر ہے کیونکہ اپوزٹ فورسز بہت تگڑی ہوتی ہیں. تو آج پاکستان میں دوبارہ فنڈامنٹلزم کی, رائٹ ونگ کی پرواز ہے. آج پھر ارادے باندھے جا رہے ہیں, جو یہ سوسائٹی تھوڑا تھوڑا انچ بائی انچ گرو کی ہے, آج اس سے وہ ساری چیزیں وڈرا کرنے کی کوشش کی جا رہی ہے. اگر کوئی جماعت کوئی بھی ہو, वो हुक्मरान को नील डाउन कर ले और हुक्मरान मान ले कि हम इसके आगे मजबूर हैं, फिर कल दूसरी उठेगी, परसों तीसरी उठेगी। और ये आजकल जो मज़हब के नाम पे पॉलिटिक्स शुरू हुई है ख़वातीन और हज़रात, इसमें अकाउंटेबिलिटी नहीं होती। ये मज़हब का इशू नहीं है, ये बुनियादी तौर पे रियासत के पावर के अंदर अपना शेयर लेने के लिए और मज़हब की इकोनॉमी से अपना फाइनेंशियल शेयर लेने की कोशिशें हैं। हमें सबको मिल के इस नेगेटिविटी को रोकना होगा। बहुत शुक्रिया।
The task of a moderator is inherently thankless and risks losing a lot of friends. So my apologies to all the panel for interrupting them when they are so eloquently delivering their speeches on this very, very important issue. Without any further ado, I wish to invite former Prime Minister Shahid Khaqan Abbasi of the PMLN to come and address as keynote speaker. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be here. And I'm grateful to the Asma Jahangir Foundation for keeping the voice of Asma Jahangir alive. It's a much needed voice, especially in the times that we live today. The question of accountability or victimization is something that we discuss a lot, but the reality of this situation remains unclear. It remains unclear because we deliberately cloud the facts. The laws are misused. The judiciary makes comments which are not reflected in their decisions. And a few who stand up suffer, and the whole country suffers. I do not want this to be a personal narrative, but I have stood in accountability courts for 12 years. I have spent 3 years in NAB jails. I don't regret whatever I said or did, but two basic questions remain. What is the purpose of accountability? And what has accountability delivered to the country? The purpose is very clear. The people, I won't go to the past, but since Pakistan came into existence, within the first 3 years we had a thing called PODA. And that became PRODA and ABDO and Ziaul Haq and NAB ordinance and stuff like that. But there's been one consistency in all these laws. They don't apply to the people who created these laws. And the people who apply these laws, the laws also don't apply to them. And that is the reality of NAB today. The NAB does not apply to the judiciary. The NAB does not apply to the military. The NAB does not apply to the business community. The NAB does not apply to the bureaucracy. Who does NAB apply to? The politicians who are declared corrupt in the media, who are tried in the media. So let me just place one simple fact before you. This is the 21st year of NAB. One politician of prominence has been convicted in NAB courts. One. Let the NAB chairman come out and say how much money has recovered from politicians. That one person is Mohammad Nawaz Sharif, who, please, I urge the legal fraternity here to look at the two cases Nawaz Sharif has been convicted in. Can you quote them as precedents anywhere in the world? And I will not go to the details of that issue, but that remains the fact. that one politician of prominence in this country has been convicted by NAB in 21 years. So where are all the kleptocrats? Where are the ones who made money? They sit in every government that is formed in Pakistan. They just change loyalties and they save themselves. When you have a law which defies every basic principle of justice, which says that I declare you guilty, now prove your innocence. That is what NAB is about. I declare you a money launderer. Now declare that you are not a money launderer. Now prove to me that you are not a money launderer. I have been accused of money laundering with my tax-paid money. With tax-paid money. Doesn't the NAB chairman know? Doesn't the judiciary know that there has to be predicate offense before you declare money laundering? You can write anything in any charge sheet. I have one case today, the charge sheet is 34 pages long. The NAB reference was 19 pages long. How does that happen? What are we doing? Where are we going? This is the situation in Pakistan today. Salahuddin Saab touched on this a little bit. The law requires me to maintain financial records for 7 years. You are trying me for 35 years. So, I say if you accuse me of something, then you also give the record for your 35 years. I definitely cannot. There has to be, I am all for accountability. If you want accountability, NAB is not accountability. NAB is whatever, it's political engineering, it is manipulating politics, it is punishing people without convicting them, whatever you want to call it. If you want accountability of politicians, it's very simple. The whole world does it. You don't need special laws. It's about tax laws. The people who apply taxes on the people of Pakistan should answer for their own assets. They should answer for their own lifestyles. What are they earning? If they are earning, then they should be paying taxes. If members of parliament walk out to a 3 crore rupee or 6 crore rupee vehicle and go to a 50 crore rupee home and their monthly electric bills are 2 lakh rupees and they pay no taxes, what does that tell you? That's a corrupt politician. Why don't we go after them? Let it start with the President of Pakistan. Let the Prime Minister be next. Let the leader of the opposition be next. Ask them this basic question. How do you justify your lifestyle? Where are the taxes? This is the basic question that needs to be asked. You want to disqualify somebody? You want to apply 62, 63 to somebody? Then use the tax laws. Anybody who is not paying taxes is committing a crime against the country. Most of us think paying taxes is optional. That's the reality of Pakistan. We had an issue in the National Assembly, a new law. We are very fond of making new laws all the time. We made 33 in one day. Nobody even read them. So we for making a new law on appointing judges. I moved an amendment. I said anybody who wants to become a judge should present his last 10 years of tax payments before the people of Pakistan. Let him show how much taxes he has paid in the last 10 years. Because if he has not paid taxes, and you'll be surprised how many people who became judges have not paid taxes, it means two things. That either they don't have a practice, they're not technically qualified to be judges, or they have not paid taxes on their income. They've hidden their income. Are they qualified to be judges? Are they qualified to judge me tomorrow? Let's be fair about these things. The politicians are much maligned, and maybe rightly so. But I can tell you, whatever I've spent 34 years in politics, whatever the government of Pakistan has given me as salary or whatever in those 34 years, I think I paid at least 10 times to lawyers in this country to defend me in NAB cases. Is that fair? What does the Prime Minister of Pakistan earn? 1,35,000 rupees. That's the reality. At least, I don't know what the guy now earns, but that's what I got. 1,35,000 a month. So, there are many questions to be answered here. Victimization, NAB is about victimization. It's not about victimization of an individual anymore, or even a group of individuals, or even a political party. The people paying the price today are the people of Pakistan. The entity paying the price for NAB today is Pakistan. And my friend Dr. Musaddiq Malik is here, he analyzes everything. So I'll give him some numbers which I pulled off the internet. I was coming here. In 2000 when NAB came into being, Pakistan had there are many ways to measure this, but one measure was we had a per capita income of $576. Today, $790. 21 years later, Bangladesh was at 358, they are at 2097. India was at 443, they are at 1900. So who lost and who won? I think without having the knowledge that Dr. Musaddiq has, I can safely say, and a big part of this is NAB. I was Petroleum Minister for 4 years or 5 years. Last year, Pakistan had an opportunity to take a decision, a simple decision. We would have saved it at least $10 billion in cash in 3 years. That decision was not taken. Why? Because no bureaucrat works anymore. When a NAB investigation officer puts 2 papers in front of a secretary who has served 35 years with integrity, one is his arrest warrant, right then and now, and the other is an approval statement against the minister. These are the choices given by a 17th-grade NAB officer who was 4 years earlier in a college to a secretary who served Pakistan for 35 years. Is this the accountability that we want? Is this accountability that we have? This is happening in Pakistan today. You will never see NAB move against a person in power at that time. If you want accountability, if I am a 80% plus of politicians never handle public money. They remain backbenchers in government or the opposition. They have no access, they have no control over public money. How can NAB apply to them? If they have robbed a bank, there are laws to do that. If they have stolen electricity, there are laws to counter that. The laws for everything. How can NAB apply to a person who has never had any control over any public money? We made all these amendments. NAB can only be amended by consensus. There are many laws, including electoral laws, that should only be amended by consensus. We don't seem to learn that, and we suffer. NAB is one of them. We made a package of amendments, gave it to the government. 4 hours later, a minister waved them in the National Assembly. Here they want an LRO. And the result is what I've shown you. Bangladesh has raced ahead, double our per capita income. India, with 1/3 the population below poverty level, has raced ahead of Pakistan in per capita income. A big part, there's been a failure of governance, a big part of that is NAB. So, there's a lot more that can be said here, but, and then I will end with a human rights issue. Does anybody care about what happens to people who are accused by NAB? Does anybody care about their families? Does anybody know that they can't operate their accounts? They can't operate their businesses? They can't get bank loans? There's a big human cost that is paid here. And I always say, and I end with this, you want to accuse a public figure? We are the only people who go through accountability at least every 5 years at the ballot box. You want to accuse me? Install cameras in the investigation rooms and in the courtrooms. Show the people of Pakistan. That's my constituency. Show them if I've been corrupt. Accuse me in front of them. Not in closed courts where the prosecutor doesn't make sense, where the laws don't make sense, where the judge has limited knowledge. And when I go to a NAB court, I go with the knowledge that he will convict me no matter what my case is. Let me tell you that. But it's not only me, we still stand defiant because we believe in what we do. We believe that without political leadership, this country will not move forward. Turncoats, hypocrites, people who sell their loyalties, don't make nations. And NAB is a tool to convert people into turncoats and to sell their souls. That's the reality of NAB. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. First, let me state that our panelist, Mr. Qamar Zaman Kaira, who parachuted in, has now ejected because he had a prior commitment at a funeral. So he has asked me to convey his apologies. We have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. Please raise your hands and I will recognize you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Is there a mic?
My name is Nawaz and my question is for Shahid Khaqan Abbasi Sahab. Abbasi Sahab, you spoke about consensus in your speech, and my question is also about the consensus. There seems to be a good understanding between Muslim League Nawaz and the People's Party regarding national issues, meaning there seems to be a good understanding and consensus between the two parties
question, please, not
regarding
speech.
National issues. Why don't you both parties find a consensus, create a consensus regarding by-election NA 133? Why don't you find a consensus candidate in NA 133 instead of fighting against each other? Thank you.
Sir, I don't know if this is relevant to the topic, but if you wish to answer. Is your mic working?
Yeah, it's not a relevant question, but the reality is that we are political parties, but we contest elections against each other. On issues, we may reach a consensus. On fighting election, we cannot.
Can I have a question?
I would ask the audience to resist the temptation to ask any question. Let's stick to the topic, please. Yes, thank you.
Assalamualaikum ji, Farida Shaheed. I want to know whether there is any analysis of how much money we have spent on the establishment of NAB, including in trying to recuperate money from and evidence from outside, versus how much money has been actually recuperated by them.
Do you wish to point this at somebody in particular?
I don't know, either Abbasi Saab or our senator from the PTI who is currently in position.
Sir.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
There's some problem with the mics. Sorry.
The NAB spends, the current spend is about 6 billion a year on NAB. The current chairman claimed that he had recovered 539 billion in his 4-year tenure. The Ministry of Finance said they had only received 1.4 billion. So 538 point, maybe my math is wrong, 537.6 billion is missing. Which the chairman NAB has said that people have repaid the banks and some plots have been recovered. Why is real estate the domain of NAB? It's specifically mentioned because that's where the money is to be made. The most corrupt institution in the country today is NAB. The more power you have, the more corrupt you are.
Thank you, sir. Yes, any other questions?
Sir, Assalamu alaikum.
Any other questions?
Sir, yes, sir. Rashid bhai, here, right.
Sorry. Oh, yes.
Yes. My name is Abdullah Malik. I'm an advocate and human rights activist. No doubt we as a civil society condemn any victimization. Dear leaders, मेरा question ये है, अपनी 98% जो youth जहाँ बैठी है, victimization accountability तो less than 1% की हो रही है. ये जो मजहब के नाम पर हमारी 98% की डेली विक्टिमाइजेशन होती है, आप जो हमारी होप है, आप हमें बताइए कि जिनको हम कहते हैं कल के ये दहशतगर्द हैं, दूसरे दिनों में कहते हैं कि नहीं ये तो बहुत अच्छी शहरी हैं. प्लीज़ बताइए कि जो मेरे 98% यूथ है, इनका जो फ्यूचर है क्या आपके सेफ हैंड में है कि नहीं है? खुदा के लिए इस इशू पे तो आप एक कंसेंसस कर लें, एक रिकंसिलिएशन कर दें कि हम इसको किसी भी सूरत में कबूल नहीं करेंगे. सेकेंडली आप एक ये भी सर दूसरा भी मेरा ऐसा है कि सर आप ये भी एक वादा करें कि आप तमाम पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज आज जो कंडेम कर रही हैं, कल वो किसी की लाठियों के सहारे इक़्तिदार में नहीं आएंगे. बहुत शुक्रिया.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch any question, Malik Saab, although of course what you said is very relevant. I've been asked to wrap up this session. Let me make some very brief concluding remarks if I may. I think we have been privileged to hear the wisdom and arguments of our panelists who are all extremely well informed, and we have gleaned the gist of the problem, which I will try to summarize as quickly as possible. The way I see it, and what I've gathered from today's discussion, there appears to be a vicious cycle of manipulation and political victimization through accountability. Let's not forget, we seem to lack an independent, uniform, and permanent model of accountability. We have had at least 11 accountability laws in our history, 3 dedicated institutions for accountability, and similar mechanisms and departments throughout our history. Now, this points to a very deep-seated problem somewhere. And I think the problem perhaps is, as has been outlined in our speakers' speeches today, there are problems with the law. There are problems with regulation of discretion that has been given to NAB. There are problems with due process, and there are problems with allegations of political victimization. No one can deny that corruption exists in Pakistan, but it is systemic. And urban legend has it that since NAB got into action, in fact what has happened is that corruption in the system has gone underground and the price has doubled or trebled. So simply by choosing a few political leaders of the opposition or bureaucrats or businessmen who are alleged to be associated with them, in cahoots with them as it is put, the problem of systemic corruption, it seems, will not go away. Thank you very much for all our speakers and for their time and their contributions. Thank you for the audience for being so patient, particularly with this very, very terrible moderator who has made many enemies today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
ना मैंने उनका कोई इस्लाम कबूल किया, ना मैंने उनका कोई निकाह कबूल किया।
I have learned through the years many lessons what activism must be all about. Activism must come with the heart, with integrity, but it must also come with the mind.
Her passion and mission was fighting for the rights of the downtrodden. When she passed in 2018, for too many people, a beacon of hope had been extinguished. But passion can't die, and missions can't be abandoned. So even after Asma, the AGHS Legal Aid Cell continues to journey on her path, extending free legal aid to thousands, especially women and children, who would otherwise barely be able to afford fighting a court battle.
Asma's legacy is alive through AGHS. AGHS has successfully taken Asma's mission forward, and our pro bono caseload has increased threefold since 2018. In the absence of any state mechanism that provides free legal services, AGHS till date remains the largest service provider in Punjab. And in 2020 alone, AGHS has provided 1,813 women, children, bonded laborers and religious minorities free legal services.
Remembered today as an irreplaceable icon in the field of human rights, Asma Jahangir was among the first in the country to speak out against death penalty, which often came about due to loopholes in an already weak criminal justice system. The AGHS Legal Aid Cell is helping push forward her legacy by helping prisoners come off the death row.
In the last 10 months, AGHS has been instrumental in having 10 prisoners acquitted facing death penalty and several prisoners facing prolonged incarceration.
Inspired by her outspoken and bold attitude to point out violations and give voice to the voiceless, the AGHS Legal Aid Cell formed Pakistan's first human rights digital media outlet, Voice PK.
VoicePK.net is a unique digital media platform where journalists and lawyers have come together to address human rights abuses against women, children and minorities, and also students, ethnic groups, etc. And on this platform, we have given the victim a voice. Often our stories have been picked up by mainstream media and by very popular shows. Policymakers have taken note of our stories and they have addressed that issue.
Asma Jahangir believed that only an empowered woman could bring real change in society. She established a paralegal program to raise awareness among women about their legal rights. One of these women is Halima Sadia, who was so inspired by the AGHS paralegal program that she filed a case against her own brothers and acquired her rightfully inherited property with the help of AGHS free legal aid.
जो औरत खुद अपना हक लेना चाहती है, अगर उसको पता है कि मेरे हक है, प्रॉपर्टी है, तो आप उसका हक जरूर लें, बजाय इसके कि आप कहें कि मेरा भाई क्या कहेगा या फलाना क्या कहेगा. ये कोई बात नहीं. अगर आपका हक है तो आप लें और स्ट्रांगली लें.
After her death, the AGHS Legal Aid Cell expanded their paralegal program. Today, 16 centers operate in Lahore.
हमने अपने पैरालीगल प्रोग्राम को भी वसी किया है. हमारे 15 सेंटर लाहौर में और एक सेंटर कसूर में काम कर रहा है, जिससे हर साल हज़ारों ख़वातीन को उनके हुकूक के बारे में आगाही दी जाती है, क्योंकि आसमा जहांगीर का कहना था कि बाशऊर औरत ही मुआशरे में इनकलाब ला सकती है.
Asma gave new hope to women languishing in jails for years. Now AGHS serves as that ray of light.
ये कह लें कि हम कखों के थे और लाखों के हो गए. हमें अपने ससुराल में आके हमें जो है ना वो बस ये कि कह लें कि पहले कोई कदर नहीं थी, इसके बाद हमें राइट मिलने के बाद हमारी कदर हुई.
There are institutionalized jail visits to provide legal aid to those who deserve it the most.
जब कोविड की वबा आई तो हमारे जो जेल विजिट थे वो बंद कर दिए गए, तो ये सूरत हाल हमारे लिए बहुत चैलेंजिंग थी, क्योंकि हम ये समझते थे कि इस वक्त सबसे ज़्यादा रिस्क उन कैदियों को है जो कि जेल में बंद हैं. हमने भरपूर कोशिश करके आईजी प्रिजन से खुसूसी जेल विजिट्स की इजाज़त ली. यूजुअली हम लोग साल में 24 विज़िट करते हैं, लेकिन कोरोना की वबा के आने के बाद और इस सूरत हाल में हमने 100 के करीब जेल विज़िट किए और वहाँ पर और जेलों में मौजूद 550 कैदियों को कानूनी इमदाद दी और उनकी रिहाई करवाई.
AGHS Legal Aid Cell plans to expand its existing programs as well as launch a special program to provide legal help for the victims of sexual violence.
AGHS has also for the first time collaborated with the government institution Violence Against Women Center in Multan and signed an MOU, and in the last year we have provided free legal services to 700 women approaching the Walk Center in Multan. For 2021, AGHS has identified sexual violence as a priority area and will be representing several survivors of sexual violence in their trial stages, as sexual violence remains an area where women fail to access justice and face prolonged trials.
I have learned through the years many lessons what activism must be all about. Activism must come with the heart, with integrity, but it must also come with the mind.
Her passion and mission was fighting for the rights of the downtrodden. When she passed in 2018, for too many people, a beacon of hope had been extinguished. But passion can't die, and missions can't be abandoned. So even after Asma, the AGHS Legal Aid Cell continues to journey on her path, extending free legal aid to thousands, especially women and children, who would otherwise barely be able to afford fighting a court battle.
Asma's legacy is alive through AGHS. AGHS has successfully taken Asma's mission forward, and our pro bono caseload has increased threefold since 2018. In the absence of any state mechanism that provides free legal services, AGHS till date remains the largest service provider in Punjab. And in 2020 alone, AGHS has provided 1,813 women, children, bonded laborers and religious minorities free legal services.
Remembered today as an irreplaceable icon in the field of human rights, Asma Jahangir was among the first in the country to speak out against death penalty, which often came about due to loopholes in an already weak criminal justice system. The AGHS Legal Aid Cell is helping push forward her legacy by helping prisoners come off the death row.
In the last 10 months, AGHS has been instrumental in having 10 prisoners acquitted facing death penalty and several prisoners facing prolonged incarceration.
Inspired by her outspoken and bold attitude to point out violations and give voice to the voiceless, the AGHS Legal Aid Cell formed Pakistan's first human rights digital media outlet, Voice PK.
VoicePK.net is a unique digital media platform where journalists and lawyers have come together to address human rights abuses against women, children and minorities, and also students, ethnic groups, etc. And on this platform, we have given the victim a voice. Often our stories have been picked up by mainstream media and by very popular shows. Policymakers have taken note of our stories and they have addressed that issue.
Asma Jahangir believed that only an empowered woman could bring real change in society. She established a paralegal program to raise awareness among women about their legal rights. One of these women is Halima Sadia, who was so inspired by the AGHS paralegal program that she filed a case against her own brothers and acquired her rightfully inherited property with the help of AGHS free legal aid.
जो औरत खुद अपना हक लेना चाहती है, अगर उसको पता है कि हम मेरे हक है, प्रॉपर्टी है, तो आप उसका हक जरूर लें, बजाय इसके कि आप कहें कि मेरा भाई क्या कहेगा या फलाना क्या कहेगा. ये कोई बात नहीं. अगर आपका हक है तो आप लें और स्ट्रांगली लें.
After her death, the AGHS Legal Aid Cell expanded their paralegal program. Today, 16 centers operate in Lahore.
हमने अपने पैरालीगल प्रोग्राम को भी वसी किया है. हमारे 15 सेंटर लाहौर में और 1 सेंटर कसूर में काम कर रहा है, जिससे हर साल हजारों खवातीन को
मत समझो हमने बुला दिया, मत समझो हमने बुला दिया, ये मिट्टी तुमको प्यारी थी, ये मिट्टी तुमको प्यारी थी, समझो मिट्टी में सुला दिया.
जो कलीदी बुनियादी हकूक़ हैं, बेसिक फ्रीडम्स हैं, जैसे आज़ादी इज्तिमा और आज़ादी तंजीम, वो भी डिपेंड करती हैं आज़ादी इज़हार पर. वकला ने पाकिस्तान में हमेशा जमहूरियत का आलम बुलंद किया है. क्या वो आज भी उतने ही आज़ाद हैं जितना 56 में थे? आपका तो फ़र्ज़ है और आपका हक़ है कि मुल्क में जो क़वानीन बनते हैं उन पर तबसरा करें, इंसाफ के साथ जो जातियाँ होती हैं उस पर तबसरा करें, जो लोगों के साथ जातियाँ होती हैं उस पर तबसरा करें. आप कुछ नहीं कर पाएंगे अगर आज़ादी इज़हार ना होगी, क्योंकि इस वक्त सूरत हाल जो है वो ये है कि आप तक सच को पहुँचने नहीं दिया जाता.
मत समझो हमने बुला दिया, मत समझो हमने बुला दिया। ये
कुदरत के बनाए भेद को समाज भेदभाव में, डिस्क्रिमिनेशन में, इन इक्वालिटी में बदल देता है। कुदरत हमें इंसान बना के भेजती है ऊपर से, कोई ठप्पा लगा के ऊपर से नहीं भेजती, कोई लेबल लगा के नहीं भेजती। ये जितने लेबल्स हैं हमारे पैदा होते ही हमारे ऊपर लगाए जाते हैं। कहाँ तो हमारी इतनी बड़ी पहचान थी कि हम पूरी दुनिया में समाने वाले लोग थे, इंसान, और अब हम छोटी सी अपनी पहचान लेके चल रहे हैं।
तुमने दिखाया सुंदर सपना,
we have a very long struggle ahead of us if we have to ensure that everyone has access to justice, to the rights that the Constitution grants to the people of the country, and if we have to make human rights a reality for the people of Pakistan.
जो ना बुझे मर के दम, जो ना बुझे मर के दम।
हमें ये प्रेशराइज कर रहे हैं कि आप जो है डेमोक्रेसी से विड्रा हो जाएं, कौमी हकूक़ से विड्रा हो जाएं, और आप जो है अपने नज़रियात से विड्रा हो जाएं। आप जो है जो गैर जमहूरी होते हैं, वो जिस पे आप तनकीद करते हैं, इस पे खामोशी इख्तियार कर लें, आइन की बात छोड़ दे, पार्लियामेंट की बालादस्ती की बात छोड़ दे, जो हम करते हैं उस सब पे जो आप आंखें बंद करनी। नहीं कर सकता हूँ, बिल्कुल नहीं कर सकता, चाहे मेरी जान चली जाए। मेरी जान इतनी अजीज नहीं है, ये डेमोक्रेसी और पार्लियामेंट के बारे में अजीज है, मेरी कौम मुझे अजीज है।
गुर्बत और अफलास है हर सू, मेहनत का ना कोई सहारा।